Okay, so in the last video, we had a look at the immune system and how the immune system manages to clear infection and generate immunological memory. Vaccination follows on from that idea because vaccination is anything that we can give someone to induce immunological memory and protect them against infectious disease. So let's have a look at the idea of immunological memory. Let's say that you have chickenpox, and you will have chickenpox for a couple of days, maybe a week. But then your immune response will kick in, your antibodies will bind to the chickenpox virus, which is known as varicella zoster, and it will either neutralize it or get something else to destroy the virus, and you will be healthy eventually. Now, if you ever come into contact with varicella zoster or the chickenpox virus again in the future, let's say through a friend, then your body will be able to react very quickly because it's got all those memory B cells and those plasma cells floating around in your body. So you have a very, very rapid increase in antibody concentration, and that is known as the secondary immune response. And the first time you got sick is the primary. So the idea behind vaccination is that we give you, a shot against the flu so that you get the primary immune response, but very quietly, and you don't actually feel it. And then you've got antibodies specific to that particular flu, so if you ever get exposed in the future, you'll be able to clear it without feeling sick. You might have noticed that in the last video I was talking a lot about T cells, and now I'm not talking about T cells at all. Well, that's because T cells aren't super useful in the context of vaccination, and all but one vaccine on the market target antibodies. So there is one T cell vaccine that is known as BCG, and that is used to prevent tuberculosis, but even that is not a very good vaccine. All the good vaccines target antibodies. So we're going to look at antibodies. Okay, now let's move on to the father of vaccines and a bit about the history of vaccines. So this guy, Edward Jenner, he came up with the first vaccine, and he did this by realizing or observing that people who had cowpox didn't really get smallpox, and he theorized that if you had contracted cowpox in the past, that somehow protected you from getting smallpox. And you might not have heard about these two viruses or these two diseases before, because cowpox, well, you really need to come into contact with a cow to get cowpox, and smallpox was eradicated in 1980, but was a very big deal in the late 1700s and continued to remain a very big deal for a very long time until a vaccine managed to wipe it out. And the reason why it was so important was because smallpox killed many, many people. Okay, so Edward Jenner tested his theory by infecting his gardener's son, this guy called James, with cowpox. And then, a couple of days later, he infected him with smallpox, because apparently that was okay back then. And sure enough, James did not get smallpox. And the reason for that is something called cross-reactivity. So that is the idea that cowpox and smallpox are similar enough in shape that immunological memory towards cowpox, so an antibody that can bind to cowpox, can also bind to smallpox when you introduce it a couple of days later. So when Edward Jenner gave James the cowpox, that increased antibodies, and the same antibodies were able to bind to the smallpox that he was given a couple of days later. And then he had the secondary immune response, and he did not get smallpox. So this was considered the first vaccine. And in fact, the word vaccine comes from the Latin for pertaining to the cow, because the vaccine came from the cowpox virus. Okay, so let's have a bit of a look at modern vaccines and what we use today. And a very interesting one is the MMR vaccine. So the MMR vaccine is measles, mumps, and rubella. And that is a combination of 3 viruses, and we give it to you in one shot. And it is a live attenuated vaccine. So live means that it is not dead, so it actually can cause disease, but attenuated means that it's been significantly weakened. And when we give you an MMR vaccine, then you've got antibody concentration on this side, and you've got time. It basically generates a primary immune response without causing disease, and then if you ever get exposed to MMR again in the future, then you will have a secondary immune response, wipe it out, and not get sick. Now, the drawback of the fact that it is a live attenuated vaccine means that if you are immunocompromised, let's say if you have HIV or if you're malnourished and your immune system is not working as intended, then the fact that it is attenuated, or the fact that this MMR vaccine has been weakened, is not going to affect you, because you are going to get infected with measles, mumps, and or rubella, because your immune system cannot respond. So you won't get, so if you're immunocompromised, you won't get this immune response. You will just get measles, mumps, and rubella, and that will not be good. So if you're immunocompromised, you cannot get the MMR vaccine. The third interesting thing is that in the 90s, there was a guy called Andrew Wakefield, and he published a paper in The Lancet drawing a link between the MMR vaccines, a measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and autism. And that led to a lot of people not vaccinating their children, and led to this resurgence of a very strong anti-vaccination movement. And in the 2000s, people were trying to recreate his results, and they realized, I can't really recreate this. And a journalist looked into Andrew Wakefield and found that he had all sorts of financial interests in removing the MMR vaccine. The Lancet eventually took down the paper, so it retracted the paper, and Andrew Wakefield is now no longer a doctor. So there is actually no established link between the MMR vaccine and autism. But unfortunately, there are still people who don't vaccinate their children against it, and measles is starting to reappear in all sorts of places. So if you've been keeping up the news recently, you have seen that measles was at Disneyland, measles in France, measles in Australia, measles in Britain, measles everywhere, because people are not vaccinating their children, which is really quite unfortunate. So there is no link between measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and autism. Okay, moving on. The flu vaccine. So the flu vaccine is a killed vaccine. And what is the significance of being killed? It's not live, so it can't actually cause disease. A lot of people think, after they get the flu vaccine, that they can get sick. Well, a flu vaccine can't actually make you sick because it's been killed. There's no flu inside the flu vaccine. It is a killed version of the flu. So there was flu there, but it's been killed. And outside you've got a shell of dead flu. But because it's got the same structure, it can still generate a primary immune response, so that if you're ever exposed to the flu again, then you will have a secondary immune response. You wipe it out, you won't get sick. Brilliant. The other thing about the flu vaccine is that it has to be given every year. So it is a yearly vaccine. And the reason for that is because the flu actually mutates. It actually evolves every year in a process called antigenic drift. So the antigenetic component, so the thing that it actually reacts with the immune system, changes slightly every year. And to illustrate this, let's say you've got the flu, and this is the 2014 flu, and this is the 2015 flu. And the 2014 flu has 4 lines coming off it, and the 2015 flu has 5 lines coming off it. Now, because the surface has slightly changed, the antibody that could bind to the 2014 flu is not actually able to bind to the 2015 flu. So that's why you need to get the flu vaccine every year. Yeah. Now, this is different from, say, cowpox and smallpox. So cowpox and smallpox are actually 2 different viruses, but they show cross-reactivity. So immunological memory against one would protect you against the other. So the flu vaccine and the flu virus is actually very finicky. The immunological response towards a flu is very variable. So if the flu changes, then you are completely without protection. So remember to get the flu vaccine every year. So that was an overview of vaccines, how vaccines work. So they work by generating immunological memory without making you sick, so that if you're ever exposed in the future, you can fight back very quickly. And a bit about the history of vaccines, and a bit about the MMR vaccine and the flu vaccine. There are a lot of other vaccines out there, and I encourage you to take a look, see if you've got them all, and if you haven't, go see your doctor. Thanks for watching, guys.